In the novel, the colonial and the gender systems are inextricably linked through their aesthetic commitment to uncover injustices, as well as to appreciate the impartialness of the system at the time. The concept of equal yet different relates to the doctrine of separate spheres, wherein each governs within his or her own sphere. Women in the narrative lack agency for the most part, regardless of their ethnicity, social class, or cultural background, relying mostly on their husbands. In the end, men are the ones who call the shots, a typical feature that is present in Victorian works of literature. This separation of powers took shape in the novel through the portrayal of women as objects of criticism, in one way or another subject to marginalization. In spite of Havelaar's crusade against the abuse of the Japanese people, the ideals of the Enlightenment remained controversial from a gender standpoint, with characters such as Tina or Adinda seen as the islands in the sea of bureaucratic men. As observed through the lens of the Dutch colonial powers in Java, there is a gap, a separation from the story itself that is preserved by the separate spheres in which men and women live in. A relevant curiosity to point out is the narrator's understanding of beauty. As he once expresses at some point, I will tell you that Madame Havelaar was not beautiful, and she did not care much for appearances which are thought of by many other women. Havelaar requires Tina, his devoted wife, to be more than the women of Arles, even though she had no reason to be proud of her nose. This leads to a series of values that are linked to women's physical attributes as subsequent flaws in a rather frustrating narrative. Women are not entirely whole. They are portrayed as objects that highlight the dominant social standards at the time. While the men are sent off to be in charge of the colonies, the trail of children and wives who tag along with the civil servants remains unacknowledged. Upon presenting his theory of beauty to his colleagues, Havelaar goes to compare a woman's beauty with the divine, as he asserts by saying how a beautiful woman, provided that her beauty is not too still, comes closest to the ideal of divinity. While trying to simultaneously capture and construct this image, he daydreams about the women from Arles, compacting the images in one single dream woman, and in turn violating the individual women he had erected. To exemplify this power and to highlight the need for physical perfection, Havelaar argues that a woman should not dishonor herself by blowing her nose, even if she has a cold. Paradoxically, Tina sneezes a moment afterwards, to Havelaar's dismay. As if an evil spirit spoke, Tina suddenly sneezed, and before she thought of it, she had blown her nose. This made Havelaar angry. To his disgust, Tina is not above blowing her nose, but she unintentionally exposes Havelaar's foolish interpretation of gender. By voicing her objection through body language, it points out her occupation of another sphere and its limitations. Her way to express disapproval comes about through a sign which lies outside male language, one that escapes Havelaar's control. This gap between gender lines of demanding female body language and male language of the mind leaves the woman with a refuge where she can voice her oppression. Tina's sneeze shatters Havelaar's illusion and idealized portrayal of female perfection. In contrast to Draxopel's wife, Tina offers a separate role within the Havelaar household. Despite how dire the situation may be, Tina always understands Max, with her feelings going beyond the material possessions and economic demands, as she has sacrificed her class status so as to live with her idealist so-called genius of a husband. The narrator truly admires Tina's devotion and dedication to little Max, her son, for Madame Havelaar was an example of care for her child, and what there was to do for or with little Max she did herself, to the great astonishment of many other ladies, who did not think proper to act as slaves to their children. While other women make use of the colonial subject to advance their freedom, Tina stands as a model for true womanhood, due to recognizing the bond between the mother and her child. Although her presence in the family seems like a simple link between her child and her husband, the mother keeps the name of the father alive, as little Max will eventually become another Max. Tina resembles the ultimate woman within separate spheres. While her husband's behavior foregrounds his political idealism, she is said to possess a beautiful soul, as expressed by the narrator. She had a noble soul, and certainly he must be blind who did not think her face very beautiful, when that soul could be read in it. Despite her role in the family demanding subordination, she has, at least unlike Draxopel's wife, a part and a name. Therefore, in this structure, the gender roles are strongly defined, making up a world of essential differences. Eventually, Upi and Tina make the final point in the construction of gender by Havelaar. As he asks Upi what she would like to choose if an angel from heaven came to ask her what she would like the most, she replies how she would like for him to take her back to heaven with him, baffling Havelaar, as she chooses the option of a non-male world, responding for herself, without mimicking the questions of the man, wishing for another world and leaving the male readership surprised. The theme about beauty ends with a desire for another world, one in heaven with different gender conceptions. A world of separate spheres centered around religion and women suggests that women may occupy a spot next to the divine. Yet by wishing for this alternate world, Tina and Upi still find themselves within the doctrine of separate spheres. Tina's needs as well as Upi's wish to ascend to heaven are part of the feminine sphere, places within the text where the male narrator gives a cue to the female discontent, with a masculine gender representation. Multatuli manages to reveal female oppression by emphasizing vital language in women as well as their alignment with heaven, instead of the world of business, for instance. Their search for a world wherein gender equality does not equate to oppression or exploitation parallels the political purpose of Multatuli. By trying to expose the instability between the Dutch power of speech and the exploitation undergone by the native population, Havelaar aims for an equal relationship between the Dutch and the indigenous population, though his complaints to his superiors about the Javanese standards of living are simply dismissed, his methods being rendered useless in an attempt to create a better world. As a result, Multatuli finds an alternative language in women's sentimental fiction. Finishing off with Multatuli's reveal of the Dutch administration of the colonies, the narrator provides the reader with a rather unique glimpse of the Javanese. He decides to let the reader become acquainted with their suffering through the tragic love story of Saia and Adinda, where Adinda is attacked on the roadside, and Saia resorts to commit suicide by a Dutch bayonet. The love story between Saia and Adinda elicits a positive response on the audience, an emotion for change and empathy, with love being the conduit to individuals' humanity, going beyond, transcending predetermined conceptions of racial superiority.